Hey guys, today we're diving into something that many of us feel, but few of us ever talk about out loud. Those moments when you're surrounded by people, even people you love or get along with, and yet, there's this emptiness. A quiet ache. Like you're not really with anyone at all. You nod, you smile, maybe you even laugh, but something's missing. And worse, you can't explain it. That's what we're exploring tonight, why you still feel lonely even around people. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, drop your location and local time in the comments. It's always amazing to see where we are all connecting from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step into the room. It's warm, familiar. There's music playing faintly in the background, something upbeat. You hear laughter, catch the flash of a smile from someone across the room, maybe a nod from someone passing by. You know these people. They know you. And yet, somehow, none of it lands. You feel like you're watching it all from behind glass. You laugh when they laugh. You ask questions, listen, even tell a story or two. But there's a silence inside you that nothing seems to fill. This is the paradox, how you can be with people and still feel without them. Surrounded, but unseen. In company, but not in connection. That kind of loneliness is tricky. It doesn't look like loneliness on the outside. You're not sitting alone at home. You're not isolated in the traditional sense. But it's real, and sometimes it's even more painful because it's hidden. You start to question yourself. Shouldn't I feel fine? Shouldn't this be enough? That self-doubt starts to creep in, compounding the ache. The crowded room can feel like a mirror. Not a reflection of who you are, but who you're expected to be. You show up. You play the part. You smile. And the more you perform, the further you feel from yourself. Because deep down, connection doesn't come from proximity. It comes from resonance. Think of it like this, being near a stereo doesn't mean you like the song. Just being in the same physical space with others doesn't automatically equal connection. You could be surrounded by voices but feel no dialogue. No emotional echo. Just sound. Sometimes, the loneliest part of all is that you're technically doing everything right. You're going out. You're socializing. You're keeping up appearances. But nothing penetrates. The world feels like it's happening around you instead of with you. You try to adjust. Maybe you drink a little to feel looser. Maybe you scroll your phone to feel less awkward. You fake another smile. But still, that persistent whisper, you're not really here. They don't really see you. There's a difference between being included and being understood. And the thing is, our culture doesn't always teach us how to distinguish the two. You might be at dinner with friends and still feel like your thoughts are too weird, too intense, too out of place to share. So you edit. You shrink. You stay safe. And that safety becomes a cage. Have you ever been in a conversation and realized you were just nodding, not really there? Not because you didn't care, but because something inside you had gone dim. Like a part of you had powered down to survive the moment. That's the part that starts to feel invisible, even to yourself. It's easy to blame yourself. You might think you're too sensitive, too needy, too much or not enough. But that's not the truth. The truth is, you're craving something deeper, and that craving doesn't make you broken. It makes you human. There are people all around the world who feel this way right now. Maybe even in this exact moment, someone else is sitting at a table full of friends, smiling on the outside and aching on the inside. You're not as alone in your loneliness as you think. Still, that doesn't make it hurt less. That pang of disconnection doesn't just affect your mood, it shapes your thoughts, your sense of worth, even your energy. You start to wonder if maybe you're the problem. If maybe you've grown distant or different or cold. But what if you're just becoming more aware of what you actually need? Sometimes, that crowded room acts like a spotlight, showing you the exact shape of your emotional hunger. You don't want small talk. You want soul talk. You don't want to be seen, you want to be known. You want connection that moves through you, that feels mutual, that gives as much as it takes. And that kind of connection is rare. Not because people don't want it, but because we're all a little scared to ask for it. You might look around and think, they are all fine. I'm the only one feeling this way. But if you could listen into their inner monologues, you'd probably hear echoes of your own thoughts. Do they really like me? Would they care if I left early? Am I just background noise here? The truth is, a lot of us are walking around with unspoken loneliness. We play our roles, attend the events, make the jokes, but beneath it all, we're yearning for someone to say, "Hey, I see you. I get you." Maybe you've experienced that rare moment where someone really locked eyes with you, really listened, really got it. And maybe it caught you off guard because it felt so different from the usual rhythm of your interactions. That difference, that's connection. That's what your body and soul are quietly starving for. But here's something important to remember: loneliness isn't always a sign that something's wrong. Sometimes it's a signal, a compass, a reminder that you're wired for depth, that you're not satisfied with surface, that your sensitivity is a strength, not a flaw. It's easy to feel shame about loneliness, to hide it, to pretend it's not there. But when you name it, when you stop pretending, you open the door to understanding, to healing, to change. And that's where we begin tonight, not by fighting loneliness, but by listening to it. What's it really telling you? What's beneath the ache? Because sometimes, the first step to connection isn't finding the right person, it's finally hearing yourself. You're sitting across from someone. Maybe it's a coworker, a friend, a cousin, someone you've known for years. They are talking, sharing something about their week, their plans, the movie they just watched. You're nodding, responding where you should. But your brain is split. One part is present, polite, tuned in just enough to keep the flow going. The other part is watching from a distance, thinking, why doesn't this feel like anything? This is the hollow moment. It's not that the other person's done anything wrong. It's not that the conversation is offensive or boring. But you can feel it, this emotional flatness, this space between you. The connection feels counterfeit. Almost like two people playing roles in a script and no one remembers the original reason for the scene. You wonder if you're expecting too much. If maybe adult relationships are just like this. Casual. Predictable. Safe. But then you remember the times when it did feel real, those late-night talks that wandered into the soul, the laughs that made your ribs ache, the silences that didn't feel awkward at all. So you know it's possible. That makes the current emptiness harder to accept. Counterfeit connection wears a convincing disguise. It mimics the surface structure of closeness. Words are exchanged. Emotions are hinted at. Smiles pass back and forth. But underneath it all, there's no actual resonance. It's like tapping on a wall and hearing nothing in return. You're speaking into an echo chamber. Or worse, into a void. You've probably heard phrases like a low vibration conversation or energy mismatch. While those might sound abstract, you've felt them. It's that sense of being in sync on logistics but out of sync emotionally. Like talking about weather patterns while your chest holds a storm no one notices. Sometimes it's situational. Maybe they are distracted. Maybe you're tired. But when it happens consistently, you start to feel like you're faking a connection you desperately need to be real. That faking takes energy. And over time, it drains you in ways you can't always articulate. You leave the interaction wondering, why do I feel more alone now than before I saw them? That question lingers. And if it happens often enough, you begin to lower your expectations. Maybe this is just how life works now. You show up. You keep it light. You don't ask for much. But the craving doesn't disappear. It just sinks lower, becoming quieter, more shameful. You might stop sharing certain thoughts because no one really hears them anyway. You might laugh at jokes that don't land for you just to stay in rhythm. You start protecting others from your depth because when you've offered it before, the silence that followed was too loud. And maybe they weren't trying to be cold. Maybe they just didn't know how to hold what you were offering. Emotional depth requires skill, attention, presence, courage. Not everyone's practiced. And that's not a judgment. It's just reality. But it doesn't make the hunger go away. You might start spending more time alone, not out of bitterness, but because solitude feels more honest than shallow connection. At least in solitude, you're not pretending. There's no need to smile when you don't feel like it. You can sit with your thoughts instead of burying them under small talk. But even that becomes a loop. Because humans are wired for connection, not just contact, but real resonance. When we go too long without it, we start to fray. Not loudly. Not all at once. But slowly. Quietly. You lose the urge to reach out. You start forgetting how it felt to be truly met. Think back. When was the last time someone really listened to you, not just heard your words, but felt your meaning? When they didn't rush to fix you or relate to you, but just sat in the moment with you. That kind of attention is rare. But it changes something. It's like water on parched earth. Now ask yourself, how often do your conversations reach that level? How many of your interactions feel mutual, honest, unguarded? And when they don't, what do you tell yourself to justify staying in them? We've been conditioned to value quantity over quality. A packed social calendar. A phone full of contacts. DMS, tags, invites, likes. But none of that guarantees substance. You could spend an entire day in conversation and still feel untouched. Because connection isn't about time, it's about presence. Emotional presence. Some connections are meant to be light, of course. Not every conversation needs to be a soul excavation. But if all of them stay on the surface, you start to feel like you're gasping in the shallow end of a pool that never gets deep enough to dive into. It's not that you're too sensitive. It's that you're tuned in. You notice the gap. You feel the flatness. And that sensitivity is information. It's your inner self telling you that you're ready for something realer. Something that doesn't leave you emptier than it found you. Sometimes you try to create that connection. You test the waters. You say something a little vulnerable. You drop a real thought in the middle of a casual chat. And when it's ignored or brushed past, you flinch a little. You note it. You file it away, not here. Not with them. Over time, you build a map of where you feel safe to be seen and where you don't. It's not about blame. It's about emotional compatibility. Not everyone's a safe harbor. And that's okay. But it does mean that genuine connection often requires risk, stepping outside the prescripted flow of interaction to say, this is what I really mean. You might get burned. You might be met with confusion or silence. But every now and then, you'll be met with recognition. Someone will pause. Their eyes will soften. And you'll know you've just touched something real between you. And when that happens, even once, it changes everything. It reminds you that you're not asking for too much. You're just asking in the wrong rooms. So the next time you're in a crowded room and you feel that hollowness, don't take it as failure. Take it as feedback. Your emotional radar is working. You're picking up on the difference between performance and presence. between contact and connection. Because deep down, you don't just want to be liked. You want to be known. You want the kind of interaction that doesn't just fill the silence, but fills the soul. You wake up, and even before your feet hit the floor, you've already begun assembling your face for the world. Not your literal one, but the one you wear emotionally. The one that says, "I'm good. I'm fine. I've got this." You know the mask fits best when no one looks too closely. It's become habit, maybe even a reflex. Throughout the day, that mask stays in place. You walk into work, into class, into family gatherings, and you know which version of yourself fits each role. With some, you're the funny one. With others, the responsible one. Sometimes you're the peacekeeper. Sometimes the fixer. Really, maybe never, the one who's simply raw, unfiltered, unguarded. We all wear masks. It's not deception, it's survival. We've learned over time which parts of us are acceptable, which parts earn love, attention, praise. So we adapt. We shapeshift. We tone ourselves down or dress ourselves up depending on the room we are in. And over time, we begin to lose track of where the performance ends and the real self begins. That's when loneliness gets sneaky. Because even when you're around people, even when you're being praised, appreciated, included, you know they're responding to the version of you you've allowed them to see. Not the whole you. Not the parts you keep wrapped tightly in silence. And so, there's this unspoken grief. Like mourning the relationships you almost have. The ones that could be real if only you felt safe enough to take off the mask. If only they saw the whole picture and stayed. But how do you know they would? Maybe you've tested it before. Shared something honest, something vulnerable, only to be met with awkwardness, deflection, or worse, distance. So you learned. You tucked that part of yourself away. Safer that way. Yet every time you choose the mask over your truth, a small part of you goes unseen. And what goes unseen begins to feel unloved. Not because you're unlovable, but because no one's ever had the chance to love that part. It's easy to think that the mask is you. That the smile, the composure, the social ease is your actual personality. But under it, there might be someone quieter, softer, more curious, maybe even a little messy. That's the self you long to share, the one who doesn't have all the answers but has all the real questions. Sometimes, when the day is over and you're alone with your thoughts, the mask finally falls. You look at your reflection, and it feels like you're meeting someone you haven't fully acknowledged in a while. Someone exhausted from holding it together. Someone silently asking, when do I get to just be me? This emotional masking often starts young. Maybe you grew up in a home where being too emotional was too much. Or maybe you were praised for being easygoing, chill, undemanding. So you learned that your value lay in not rocking the boat. In being pleasant, manageable, predictable. The problem is, emotional intimacy requires unpredictability. It requires moments when you say something risky, something unfiltered, and trust that the other person won't flinch or run. But if you've spent years performing safety, it feels almost dangerous to drop the act, even if the reward is deeper connection. Have you ever had someone surprise you with their honesty? Maybe they admitted something raw, something you thought only you felt. And in that moment, your walls cracked. You felt relief. Recognition. Like, oh, you too. That kind of moment is rare, but it only happens when someone's brave enough to take off their mask first. There's a silent question running through most social interactions: is it safe to be real here? And more often than not, we answer it with caution. We keep things light. We make jokes. We change the subject when it edges too close to the heart. The danger of this habit is subtle. You can spend years surrounded by people and never once feel with them. Because you've never shown them the parts of you that actually crave connection. You've shown them your mask. And the mask is easy to like, but impossible to love fully. Real connection doesn't come from perfection. It comes from presence. From showing up exactly as you are, no filter, no spin, no polished edges, and trusting that even if someone doesn't get it right away, you've taken one step closer to being truly seen. But how do you begin, especially if you've been hiding for so long? It starts with small shifts. Instead of saying, "I'm fine," try saying, "I'm okay, but kind of tired emotionally." Instead of nodding through a topic you don't care about, try saying, "I don't know why, but this feels a little off to me tonight." Instead of laughing when you don't mean it, let the silence be there. You won't get it right every time. Sometimes people won't respond well. But that's part of the filter, too. Not everyone is meant to hold space for your truth. And that's okay. Because when you do find someone who can, the relief is enormous. It's like finally exhaling after holding your breath for years. It's also important to ask yourself, which masks am I wearing out of fear? And which ones can I set down, even for a moment? Sometimes you don't need to drop all the armor at once. Sometimes just unbuttoning it slightly, letting someone see a glimpse of your real self, is enough to begin. And as you do that, you might notice something else. You're not the only one masking. Other people are performing, too. Out of habit. Out of fear. Out of longing. And when you show up a little more real, you give them silent permission to do the same. The beautiful irony is that the thing we use to protect ourselves, our masks, is the very thing that keeps us from the connection we crave. Taking them off feels risky. But living behind them, that's a slow kind of loneliness that builds day after day until you forget what it felt like to be truly seen. So here's the truth you already know: the mask might get you applause, but only your real self can receive love. There's a strange moment that sneaks up on you in the middle of a group setting. Laughter's bouncing around the room, everyone's voices overlapping, stories and jokes flying. You're smiling. Maybe even laughing, too. But then, for a flicker of a second, something in your chest tenses. Like you've stepped slightly outside of yourself and are watching it all unfold, watching you unfold, and wondering, why do I still feel separate from this? It's the experience of disconnection in the middle of togetherness. The paradox of being surrounded and yet untouched. Of participating in the social ritual while feeling quietly distant from the emotional core of it. The moment when you ask, if I slipped out of this room right now, would anything actually shift? That thought isn't selfish, it's revealing. It exposes a craving for significance, not in the sense of importance or praise, but in the deeper sense of being felt. Being noticed on a level that goes beyond your presence. Being known in a way that doesn't require performance. You might even wonder, do these people love me, or do they love what I represent to them? Am I the comfort friend? The therapist friend? The funny distraction? What happens if I stop filling that role? Do I still belong? This kind of alienation doesn't always stem from the people around you being shallow or careless. Sometimes it stems from a lack of emotional risk-taking on both sides. Everyone's participating in a shared performance, friendly, warm, functional, but it never cracks through to that raw, unpolished honesty that creates actual closeness. It's like living in a house made of glass. You can see everyone and they can see you. But no one's opening the door. Everyone's waving through windows, smiling, nodding, staying neatly inside the roles they've chosen. And you start to realize that presence and intimacy are not the same thing. Someone can be in your life every day, but never truly see your internal world. You can share hundreds of conversations and still not know each other's fears, dreams, private chaos. Sometimes you test the waters. You drop a small truth. You say something with weight. Not too much, just a glimpse. And the way they respond tells you everything. Do they lean in? Or do they pivot away, smoothing the moment over with humor or platitudes? The the scariest part is how easy it becomes to stop trying. To decide, people don't want depth. They want ease. So you shrink back into agreeable small talk, nodding along while your deeper thoughts lie dormant, untouched, quietly fading. But here's the quiet truth: you weren't made to be tolerated. You weren't designed to be background noise in someone else's day. Your soul, your real self, isn't content with being an accessory to other people's comfort. You're here to be felt, not just included. That hunger isn't weakness. It's wisdom. It's your inner compass pointing toward what's real. But it also means being honest about what kinds of relationships you've accepted. About how many friendships are built on proximity and convenience rather than emotional compatibility. About how often you've settled for being liked instead of being known. You might look around and realize a lot of people know your story, but very few know your spirit. They know your job, your hobbies, your playlists, your weekend plans. But they don't know what keeps you up at night. What you pray for in silence. What memories still ache. And maybe it's not their fault. Maybe you never gave them a chance. Or maybe you did once and they flinched. So you stopped. But the ache remains. Because no amount of socializing, no matter how frequent or animated, can substitute for resonance. That moment when someone mirrors your emotion back to you without fixing, filtering, or fleeing. You know that moment. It's rare but unforgettable. It's the time someone noticed your silence and didn't fill it with noise. The time they said, "You don't have to be okay for me to stay." The time you said something hard and they didn't look away. That's the antidote to social loneliness. Not more people. Not louder company. But true witnessing. The kind that doesn't require you to shrink, smooth, or edit yourself. So ask yourself, how often do you feel truly witnessed? Not just heard, but understood. Not just smiled at, but seen clearly, deeply, without agenda. And then, here's the brave part, ask yourself the reverse: how often do you offer that kind of witnessing? Do you hold space for other people's truth, or are you also quick to fill the silence, smooth the awkwardness, fix the discomfort? Loneliness doesn't always come from others failing us. Sometimes it comes from us hiding ourselves so well that no one has the chance to meet us where we actually are. But you're allowed to be messy in front of the right people. You're allowed to say, "I don't know what I feel, but I want to figure it out here with you." You're allowed to drop the performance mid-scene and say, "Can we talk about something real?" And if they can't hold that space, that's information, not failure. The people who can will find you faster when you stop hiding behind curated ease. There's a whole world of quiet depth out there, people who are waiting, just like you, to talk about more than weather and work. Who are desperate for conversation that leaves them feeling nourished, not drained. Who would be relieved to meet someone willing to be honest first. You might have to go first. You might have to say something real before anyone else is brave enough to follow. But when you do, something incredible happens. The room starts to shift. The laughter softens. The energy deepens. And for the first time in a long time, you don't feel like a visitor in your own life. You feel like you've come home. There's a particular kind of loneliness that doesn't announce itself loudly. It creeps in quietly on the edge of a group chat you don't really feel part of anymore, or in the silence after you share something and no one replies. It whispers through the pauses in conversation that once flowed freely. You tell yourself it's fine, that people get busy. But deep down, you're wondering something harder to admit: have I outgrown them? Or have they outgrown me? Friendship breakups aren't always explosive. Most of the time, they fade. You slowly stop being invited. Or you stop accepting. Conversations that once held hours now stretch thin, like plastic wrap, transparent, flimsy, and easy to tear. And yet, there's grief in that unraveling. A deep ache that says, "This mattered once. Why doesn't it anymore?" You scroll back through old messages and see versions of yourself laughing, planning, dreaming with people who now feel like strangers. You wonder if something changed in you or in them. Maybe both. Maybe life pulled you onto different tracks and neither of you tried hard enough to pull each other back. This isn't about blame. It's about recognition. That sometimes people grow in opposite directions. One of you starts asking deeper questions. The other prefers the surface. One of you wants space to heal and reflect. The other wants things to stay easy and light. And there's no villain in that story, just misalignment. The danger lies in pretending it's still the same. In holding on out of nostalgia rather than presence. Because when you keep circling friendships that no longer nourish you, the emptiness deepens. You end up feeling lonelier with them than you would feel alone. You tell yourself you're being loyal. That friendship means sticking around no matter what. But true loyalty isn't about staying, it's about honesty. It's about asking, is this still a space where I can be myself? Or am I showing up to protect a memory instead of participating in a relationship? Sometimes you realize you've been the one who drifted. You started pulling back not because you're cold, but because you've changed. You've begun to crave different kinds of conversations. You're more introspective now. More sensitive to dynamics that feel draining. And it's hard to explain that to people who still see you as you were. But growth shouldn't feel like betrayal. You're allowed to evolve. You're allowed to shift. You're allowed to love someone from afar because being close to them no longer aligns with the person you're becoming. And yet, that doesn't erase the grief. We don't talk enough about the heartbreak of losing friends who were once your entire world. The inside jokes, the shared playlists, the mutual support, it all builds a foundation that feels permanent. And when it cracks, it feels disorienting. Like a part of your identity is dissolving. You wonder, was it ever real? But it was. It just ran its course. Still, there's a kind of loneliness that lingers when a connection fades and no one says goodbye. You just stop talking. Stop texting. Stop checking in. And because it wasn't a fight, there's no closure. Just silence. And in that silence, you start rewriting the narrative. Maybe you think they stopped caring. Maybe you think you did something wrong. But often, it's simpler and sadder than that. Life just got in the way. Priorities shifted. Emotional needs changed. And neither of you knew how to bridge the new distance. Sometimes you hold on to the fragments. You like their posts. They like yours. You comment "miss you" under a photo, but neither of you follows through. It's a ritual of remembrance, but not connection. And you feel the hollowness behind it. You feel the absence growing wider even as the digital gestures continue. So what do you do with this kind of loneliness? The one rooted in memory and quiet endings. You grieve it. Fully. Don't minimize it just because it wasn't romantic or dramatic. Let yourself feel the ache of lost connection. The sting of no longer fitting where you once felt at home. Give it the same respect you'd give any other heartbreak. And then you ask yourself what kind of friendships you want now. Not the ones you used to have. Not the ones that worked for the old version of you. But the ones that resonate with who you are now. Who you're becoming. That means looking for people who meet you where you're emotionally at. Who hold space for silence and vulnerability, not just shared interests or nostalgia. Who are willing to evolve with you, not hold you to a version of yourself you've outgrown. This might mean reaching out more intentionally. Starting over in small ways. Asking questions that matter. Listening more deeply. Taking social risks again, even when the last ones hurt. Not everyone will meet you there. But someone will. And when they do, the relief is immediate. It feels like drinking water after pretending soda was enough. Like finally exhaling in the presence of someone who sees the current you, not just your highlight reel or your history. But don't be surprised if that takes time. You're rebuilding a form of trust in yourself and others. You're learning that your needs are valid, even if they make some people uncomfortable. You're discovering that it's okay to let go of connections that no longer bring you peace. Loneliness around others is often a signal, not a sentence. It points to what you're craving, to what's missing, to the kind of depth you're ready for. So let this be your quiet reminder: you're allowed to outgrow friendships. You're allowed to seek more. You're allowed to protect your energy without guilt. And if you're in that space now, grieving, reflecting, drifting, know this: there are people out there who are searching for someone exactly like you. Not the polished, agreeable version. The real one. The one who feels deeply, questions often, and shows up with honesty. They are out there. And they are lonely too. It's late. The kind of late where everything feels too quiet. Your phone lights up with messages, nothing urgent, just scattered replies in group chats, old memes, links to videos. Notifications, yes. Connection. Not really. You stare at the screen for a moment, and the thought creeps in again: why do I always feel like the one giving more? This kind of loneliness doesn't come from isolation, it comes from imbalance. You show up. You check in. You ask how they are doing. You remember birthdays. You sense when something's off. But when it's your turn, when you start to dim, there's silence. You tell yourself it's fine. That they are just busy. That maybe you're being needy. But there's a deep, persistent ache when care isn't reciprocated. Not because you need to be the center of attention, but because part of you is quietly wondering, am I as important to them as they are to me? This is the loneliness of emotional labor without return. Of constantly holding space for others while no one thinks to ask, hey, how are you doing, really? Over time, it wears on you. You start editing yourself, sharing less, needing less, expecting less. You become the reliable one, the strong one, the listener. And while that sounds noble, it can slowly erase you. Because in becoming what others need, you forget that you need, too. You might even catch yourself feeling guilty for wanting more. For wishing someone would initiate. For hoping someone would check in first. But that guilt doesn't belong to you. It's the echo of past dynamics where you were praised for being low maintenance, easygoing, undemanding. Where you were taught, silently or overtly, that needing less made you more lovable. But emotional intimacy is a two-way street. And one-sided connection is like trying to swim in shallow water. You can move, but you'll never feel fully held. Maybe you start testing the waters. You pull back just a little. You wait to see who notices, who reaches out, who asks where you've been. Sometimes the answer hurts. Sometimes no one does. And that realization can be devastating, not because it means you're unlovable, but because it confirms something scarier: you were the glue. You were the emotional connector, the bridge, the caretaker. And without your effort, everything fades. That's a heavy burden to carry. Not because you mind giving, but because you hoped someone else would meet you there. That someone else would bring the same energy, the same consistency, the same softness. And when they don't, you start to wonder if your presence is appreciated or just convenient. The truth is, people aren't always aware of the weight you're carrying. They don't always realize how much effort it takes to stay emotionally available. Especially if you've been doing it for years, if they've come to expect your check-ins, your understanding, your reliability. You become part of the emotional infrastructure, silently supporting everyone else while your own walls crack. But here's what's real: your needs are not a burden. Your longing to be poured into is not selfish. Your desire to feel matched is not unreasonable. It's human. We all want to feel like someone is thinking of us without being reminded. Like someone is paying attention to our silence, not just our words. Like someone remembers the version of us that also needs care, not just the version that gives it. So what do you do when you feel like the emotional giver in all your relationships? First, you pause. You take inventory. You ask yourself, who makes me feel seen? Who checks in without being prompted? Who remembers what matters to me? You might find that some people do, but in quieter, subtler ways. A message you overlooked. A moment of care you didn't fully register. But if you look closely and still find nothing, if the scale is truly imbalanced, it might be time to set it down. Not with anger. Not with drama. Just with honesty. You're allowed to have conversations that start with, "I've been feeling a little disconnected lately." You're allowed to say, "I love being there for you, but sometimes I wish it went both ways." And yes, those conversations are scary. Because they risk rejection. They risk being told you're too sensitive or expecting too much. But they also open the door to truth. To clarity. To the possibility that someone simply didn't know and wants to do better. And if they don't, that's clarity too. You're not meant to be everyone's emotional reservoir. You deserve friendships that feel like friendship, not emotional caretaking disguised as connection. Start by asking yourself, when's the last time someone made you feel nourished just by being with them? When's the last time someone reached out first? When's the last time you felt safe receiving, not just giving? Because you deserve that. Not occasionally. Not by accident. But consistently. Intentionally. This loneliness you feel, it's not about numbers. It's about imbalance. It's about the slow erosion that happens when you're always extending, always reaching, always being the safe place, while no one holds that space for you. But here's the powerful part, you can stop. You can stop overextending. You can stop shrinking your needs to protect other people's comfort. You can stop confusing being needed with being valued. And you can start investing in people who give you energy, not just take it. People who notice. People who ask. People who match. It might mean building new connections from scratch. It might mean letting go of old roles that no longer serve you. It might mean sitting in the discomfort of unmet needs, but it also means honoring them. And in doing that, you're telling yourself the one truth that matters most: I am worthy of being cared for, too. There's a moment, you've probably felt it, when you're in a room full of people, conversation buzzing, laughter bubbling up all around, and yet, you feel like a ghost. Not invisible, exactly. Just a not there. You nod, you smile, you say the right things. But inside, something is hovering at the edge of detachment. Like you're performing yourself rather than being yourself. This is the loneliness of not being understood. It's different from being alone. You can handle alone. In fact, sometimes you crave it. But this is the ache of being around others who don't quite get you. Who don't notice when you pull back. Who don't ask deeper questions. Who take your surface and assume that's all there is. You start wondering if it's your fault. Maybe you're just hard to read. Maybe you're too guarded. Maybe you should try harder to be relatable. So you adjust. You censor. You soften the rough edges of your truth. But over time, it becomes exhausting. Because playing a version of yourself, no matter how well you do it, still leaves you feeling unseen. You remember moments where someone did get it. Maybe just once. A friend who asked the right question. A stranger who made a comment that went deeper than small talk. A journal entry where your own words finally made sense. And you hold on to those moments because they prove it's possible. That somewhere out there, understanding can happen. So why is it so rare? Part of the answer lies in how the world rewards performance. Being easy to be around. Being agreeable. being fun, being low maintenance. All traits that make social interaction smoother, but not necessarily more real. It's not that people don't care. It's often that they don't know. They don't know what you're carrying. They don't know what you need. They don't know how much you're holding back just to keep the peace, to avoid the awkwardness, to not feel like too much. So you learn to stay quiet when something deep stirs inside. You nod instead of correcting. You chuckle instead of questioning. You offer comfort instead of asking for it. And every time you do, you reinforce the mask. You widen the distance between how you feel and how you present. And the loneliness deepens, not because others have pushed you away, but because you've had to keep so much of yourself hidden to stay accepted. You think about opening up. You rehearse the words. You imagine the scene, "Hey, can I tell you something kind of personal?" But then the doubt creeps in. What if they don't get it? What if they laugh it off? What if they change how they see me? So you retreat. Again. And in that retreat, you feel lonelier than ever. Not because no one's around, but because no one's reaching in. Sometimes the deepest isolation isn't about who's absent, but about how much of yourself is unshared, unwitnessed, unknown. But here's the hard part: people can't understand what you don't reveal. That doesn't mean it's your responsibility to bare your soul to everyone. Not everyone earns that access. But part of bridging the loneliness of not being understood is finding ways to show up as your whole self. Slowly. Intentionally. Authentically. You start by noticing who makes you feel safe, even just a little. Who listens without rushing to fix. Who holds space without interrupting. Who mirrors something familiar back to you, even if they can't fully relate. You don't need dozens of those people. One or two can change everything. Because when you truly understood, even briefly, it relieves something you didn't realize you were carrying. You exhale. Your shoulders drop. You feel seen. Not for what you do, or what you offer, or how you entertain, but for who you are when you're not performing. And maybe that's the scariest part. To be seen means letting go of control. It means showing the parts of you that feel fragile, unpolished, complicated. It means risking rejection. But it also means risking connection. Because understanding is built in layers. In shared glances. In late-night talks. In slow, mutual curiosity. And it doesn't always come from people you expect. Sometimes it's the soft-spoken colleague who surprises you with empathy. Sometimes it's a new friend who asks a deeper question and waits for the real answer. Sometimes it's yourself rereading something you wrote and finally realizing that's what I've been trying to say. So how do you stop feeling misunderstood? You begin by understanding yourself. You get clear on what you feel, what you need, what you're afraid of. You stop gaslighting your own emotions. You stop minimizing what hurts. You sit with your truth until it feels solid in your hands, and then you decide who is safe enough to hear this. You start small. A text. A voice note. A vulnerable comment that opens a door. Not everyone will step through, but someone might. And when they do, you'll remember what it feels like to be mirrored, to be met. And when no one's around, you practice offering that understanding to yourself. You write it down. You speak it aloud. You let your inner voice soften. You remind yourself, I make sense, even if others don't always get it. Because the loneliness of not being understood isn't permanent. It's a signal, a longing, a quiet call for resonance. And that resonance does exist. You just might have to be the one to echo first. You don't talk about it much, but you felt it. That moment when someone laughs a little too hard at your expense, when a group moves on without checking if you're still there, when your messages go ignored a little too often. It's subtle, not always cruel, but it sticks. And soon, a question forms in the background of your mind: am I being quietly excluded? This is the loneliness of the almost invited. The not quite left out, but not really included either. And it hurts more than isolation. Because you're near connection, but not in it. You replay the small things. The shared plans you heard about after. The group photos you weren't part of. The times you suggested something and got no response, only to watch someone else suggest the same thing later, and suddenly everyone's excited. You tell yourself not to overthink it. You've heard it before, don't take it personally. People are busy. It's not about you. And maybe sometimes that's true. But sometimes it is about you. Or at least, about how people are choosing to value or not value your presence. Still, you hesitate to say anything. Because you don't want to sound petty. You don't want to make drama. So instead, you shrink. You lower your expectations. You pretend not to care. But beneath that, there's an ache, a low thrum of rejection. Not dramatic. Not explosive. Just the kind that makes you feel like a background character in your own social life. And that kind of loneliness can feel even more confusing. Because from the outside, it looks like you're included. Like you've got friends. Like you're doing fine. But there's a difference between being around people and being wanted by them. Sometimes the signals are unspoken. They tag each other in jokes but leave you out. They make plans in front of you without inviting you. They remember each other's milestones but forget yours. You begin to wonder if your presence is more tolerated than welcomed. You might try harder. You overextend. You offer to organize things, to help, to support. You become the one who makes the effort. But something feels off. It's like you're applying for a spot you already thought you had. And with every small slight, your self-worth takes a hit. Not in big, obvious ways. But in those quiet late-night moments where you ask yourself, is there something wrong with me? Why doesn't anyone fight to keep me around? The truth? Sometimes people just don't see you clearly. Or worse, they do see you, but they've assigned you a role you never agreed to. The listener. The helper. The one who's always fine. So they stop checking in. They stop including you in ways that count. And because you're so good at pretending you're okay, they believe it. But even roles that look socially acceptable can be deeply lonely when they are not your choice. So what do you do when you feel quietly excluded? First, name it. Privately, just to yourself, I feel left out. Not imagined. Not dramatic. Just real. Sit with the honesty of it. Then ask, what do I need from these connections? Do you want deeper inclusion? Do you want to feel more equal? Do you want the same energy you give? Once you know that, you can begin to act, not react. Sometimes that means speaking up. Gently. Directly. Saying something like, hey, I noticed I've been left out of a few things lately, and I just want to check in about that. You're not demanding anything. You're inviting awareness. Other times, it means stepping back. Not in bitterness, but in clarity. You stop chasing the illusion of belonging and start creating space to be truly seen elsewhere. You shift your focus from being included to being respected. From being tolerated to being valued. And maybe that means fewer people. Smaller groups. Simpler interactions. But the loneliness begins to fade, not because you've filled your schedule, but because you've stopped auditioning for belonging. There's freedom in that. There's peace in knowing you don't have to keep proving your worth to stay in the room. You don't have to beg to be remembered. You don't have to shrink to stay accepted. You might also find that the ones who truly value you, who see you, will notice your pullback. They'll check in. They'll ask questions. they'll make space. But if no one notices, then that's your answer. It doesn't mean you're not worthy. It means you were investing in people who weren't ready or willing to see you fully. And while that's painful, it's also power. Because now you can stop wasting energy trying to fit into a space that was never built with you in mind. Loneliness isn't always a sign of lack. Sometimes it's a sign of growth. A quiet push toward the people, places, and connections that will actually meet you where you are. So if you've been feeling on the outside lately, know this. You're not wrong for noticing. You're not weak for caring. And you're not too much for wanting to be included, fully, genuinely, without condition. You don't have to keep asking for crumbs when you deserve a seat at the table. There are nights when you lie in bed, replaying conversations in your head, not because anything terrible happened, but because you felt like you didn't belong. Again, this is the loneliness of not fitting in. It's subtle at first. A quiet mismatch. A pause in a joke you didn't find funny. A moment when everyone laughed and you didn't get why. A shared memory you weren't part of. It builds over time, this sense of being adjacent to connection, but never quite inside it. Maybe it started early. At school, when everyone else seemed to click effortlessly while you watched from the edge. Maybe it was family, when your interests, your temperament, your way of seeing the world didn't quite align with theirs. Or maybe it's more recent, in adulthood, when you realize that the people around you just don't think like you. They are louder, or more confident, or more driven by things you can't bring yourself to care about. So you start adjusting. You learn to mirror their energy. You laugh at the right moments. You dress to match. You pick up the slang, the hobbies, the opinions. And you get by. You blend. But blending is not belonging. And deep down, you know it. Because fitting in requires bending. It asks you to tuck away the parts of you that might not land well. The quiet. The weird. The intense. The sensitive. The questioning. The uncool. You shave off pieces of yourself until you become a version that's acceptable, but not whole. And even when people like you, it doesn't feel real. Because they don't like you. They like the curated version you've presented. And you're left wondering, if I stopped performing, would they still stay? That's where the loneliness creeps in. You're surrounded by people, yet you feel like a stranger in their world. Like you've been cast in the wrong movie and no one else notices. You start to believe you're the problem. That you're too different. Too awkward. Too intense. Too whatever. You search for proof that you're normal, that you're lovable, that you make sense. And sometimes you even question whether you'll ever find a place where you truly fit. But what if the goal isn't fitting in? What if the goal is finding alignment? Because here's the truth, fitting in is about adjusting yourself to be accepted. But alignment is about being yourself and finding others who meet you there. It's slower. It's messier. But it's real. And the people you align with, you don't have to explain your silence to them, or your enthusiasm, or your sadness, or your humor. They get it. Not because they've rehearsed it, but because they resonate with it. Your weird makes sense to their weird. Your heart beats a rhythm they recognize. You might not have many of those people right now. That's okay. They're rare, but they exist. And in the meantime, you can stop blaming yourself for not fitting into places you were never designed for. You can stop calling your difference a flaw. You can start reclaiming the parts of you you've hidden just to feel tolerated. Because you don't need to be a watered-down version of yourself to deserve connection. You can be quiet and worthy. You can be different and deeply lovable. You can be intense, thoughtful, curious, emotional, and still find people who don't just accept that, but love you because of it. And sometimes, the act of being fully yourself is what calls those people in. It's scary, though, because showing up authentically risks rejection. And rejection hurts, especially when you've been carrying the wounds of not fitting in for so long. But it also frees you. Because when someone connects with the real you, it heals something deep. It reminds you that belonging isn't about matching, it's about resonance. So take up your space, even if it feels awkward. Say the thing, even if it feels vulnerable. Wear the outfit, follow the interest, keep the passion, even if it doesn't match the room. Because one day, you'll look around and realize you're no longer trying to shrink into someone else's mold. You're standing fully in your shape, and the people beside you, they are not confused by it. They chose it. And that kind of connection, that's not just belonging. That's home. There's a strange kind of silence that settles in after a conversation ends, one where you feel more alone after talking than you did before. You know the type. The small talk that leaves your chest hollow. The conversations that never scratch the surface. The times you share a piece of yourself only to be met with a nod, a smile, and then a swift pivot to safer ground. This is the loneliness of shallow connection. You're not lacking contact. You're not isolated. You just are untouched. Like waves brushing past without ever soaking in. And it's one of the most confusing kinds of loneliness, because on paper, you're connected. Messages are exchanged. Comments lacked. You meet up, you chat, you laugh. But afterward, you're left wondering, why do I still feel empty? Because depth matters. And you're not needy or dramatic for craving it. You want something real. The kind of connection that feels like mutual leaning, where someone sees the chaos behind your eyes and doesn't flinch. Where "how are you" isn't just a formality but an actual question. Where silence isn't awkward, it's peaceful. But it's hard to find. Not because people are shallow, but because many are afraid of depth. It requires vulnerability. And vulnerability means risk. So instead, we default to safety. Weather, work, memes, jokes, gossip, the familiar loops. We skate across the surface because diving down takes courage, and most people are tired, busy, distracted, or emotionally unavailable. You start to wonder, is it too much to want more? But the truth is, you're not asking for too much. You're asking for enough. Enough honesty to say, I'm struggling today. Enough presence to ask, what's really on your mind? Enough openness to say, that hurt me, but I still care. And until you find that, everything else feels like an echo, familiar, but never fulfilling. The trouble is, we've been conditioned to equate connection with frequency. The more texts, the more calls, the more hangouts, the more connected we must be. Right? But it's not about how often you talk. It's about what you're allowed to say when you do. Are you allowed to be honest? Messy? Quiet? Confused? Or do you feel like you have to wrap every truth in humor, every fear in a filter, every dream in a disclaimer? Because shallow connections demand masks. But deep ones invite truth. And maybe the reason you feel lonely is because you've been stuck in relationships where you're only safe to show 20% of who you are. You're censored, shrunk, dimmed. And no one, not even the people closest to you, knows what really lives inside your head. That's not your fault. Most of us were taught to keep things light, to avoid making others uncomfortable. So we joke about our pain, laugh off our confusion, and only cry in private. But eventually, the hunger for something deeper grows louder. So how do you find depth? You start by becoming the kind of person who offers it. You ask better questions. You sit in the silence after someone says something raw. You say things like, that sounds really hard. Want to talk about it, or I've felt something similar. Here's what helped me. you stop rewarding surface-level connection with your full emotional investment. And instead, you invest in the slow, patient work of building something real. It won't always work. Some people won't meet you there. That's okay. Not everyone is meant to. And it doesn't make them bad, it just means they are not your deep people. But others, they'll lean in. Tentatively at first, then fully. They'll thank you for going first. For making space. For showing that it's safe to be human here. That's when the loneliness begins to shift. Not because you've surrounded yourself with more people, but because you found the right kind. The ones who don't flinch at your darkness. The ones who celebrate your weird. The ones who let the conversation go long and winding and messy and never once look bored. Those are the people worth waiting for. And in the meantime, hold space for yourself. Be your own deep listener. Write the truths you're too afraid to speak yet. Ask yourself the hard questions. Answer honestly. Build that muscle, because the more deeply you know yourself, the easier it becomes to spot those who are ready to meet you in that same depth. And when you do, it won't feel like work. It'll feel like coming home. Sometimes loneliness doesn't hit you all at once. It creeps in slowly, like fog rolling across a familiar landscape, making everything feel just a bit farther away. And some of the most intense loneliness happens not when you're alone, but when you're surrounded by people and still feel invisible. This is the loneliness of being misunderstood. You explain something you're passionate about and someone brushes it off. You share a story and they miss the point. You express how you feel and you're told you're being too sensitive, too dramatic, too much. Bit by bit, you begin to pull back, not because you don't have anything to say, but because you've stopped believing anyone will really hear you. You start speaking less, filtering more. You learn what's safe to share. You avoid topics that matter most to you because those are the ones that seem to get lost in translation. And the more you censor yourself, the more isolated you feel. Not because you're alone, but because your inner world feels unseen. It's exhausting, this dance of self-protection. You walk through conversations wearing armor, smiling, nodding, agreeing. But inside, you're wondering if anyone would even recognize you if you dropped the mask for just a second. And here's the quiet heartbreak of being misunderstood. It makes you question your reality. Was I really overreacting? Was my idea actually dumb? Was I just talking too much? You begin to doubt your instincts. You rewrite your memories. You tell yourself maybe you are hard to understand. Or maybe you're just not explaining things right. You start adjusting your words, your tone, your timing, trying desperately to bridge the gap. But no matter how careful you are, the message still gets lost. Or worse, it gets twisted. You say, I'm overwhelmed, and someone hears, I'm weak. You say, I need space, and someone hears, I don't care about you. You say, this matters to me, and someone hears, you're overthinking it. And so the loneliness deepens. Because it's not just that people don't get you. It's that they don't even try. You're left holding a version of yourself that feels too complicated, too intense, too layered for the people around you. And eventually, you start to believe it's your fault for being too hard to reach. But here's something you need to remember: being misunderstood doesn't mean you're broken. It means you haven't found the right translators yet. Because there are people out there who speak your language. Maybe not fluently, not at first, but they'll try. They'll ask clarifying questions. They'll notice your pauses. They'll see when your smile doesn't reach your eyes. They'll care enough to ask again, to listen longer, to dig deeper. They won't always agree with you, but they'll honor you. And in their presence, you'll feel something you haven't felt in a while: seen. Truly seen. But until then, it's easy to fall into silence. To think, what's the point of sharing if no one understands? And that's valid. That pain is real. But please, don't confuse being misunderstood with being unworthy. Your story still matters. Your emotions are still valid. Your perspective still holds truth. Even if no one around you can mirror it back to you just yet. So what can you do in the meantime? Start by giving yourself the understanding others haven't. Write letters to yourself. Journal the things you feel. Speak out loud in your room. Build fluency in your own voice, your own needs, your own truth. The more you understand yourself, the less you'll rely on external validation. Then, begin to choose differently. Start noticing the people who listen, not just to respond, but to understand. The ones who ask you why instead of just nodding blankly. The ones who stay when the conversation gets uncomfortable. And when you find those people, even just one, hold on to them gently. Be patient as they learn your language, just as you'll learn theirs. Because mutual understanding isn't instant. It's built, moment by moment, in the space where both people are willing to really see each other. And the moment you feel that rare, electric moment where someone gets you, it'll make the long loneliness worth it. Not because the pain disappears, but because now you know you were never too complicated. You just needed someone who spoke your kind of human. You ever find yourself surrounded by people who technically know you, yet feel like no one actually knows you? That's the loneliness of emotional unavailability when you try to reach out, but it's like knocking on a door that never opens all the way. Sometimes it's subtle. You tell someone you're having a tough day and they respond with a joke. You express your anxiety and they say you worry too much. You start to talk about your dreams and they change the subject. Other times, it's more direct. You've been hurt, and when you try to open up, you're met with silence. Or worse, dismissal. You're being dramatic. Let's not talk about that right now. And after enough of those moments, you start to shut down, not just with them, but with everyone. You learn to carry everything alone, even when you're technically not alone. You stop trying to express what you feel. You keep things light because deep never seems welcome. You become your own therapist, your own comforter, your own echo chamber. And it's lonely. Not because you're alone in the world, but because every attempt to connect falls flat. What makes this kind of loneliness so hard is that it tricks you. You start to believe maybe you're asking for too much. You lower your expectations. You tell yourself you should be grateful just to have people around. But connection without depth feels like drinking salt water. It looks like relief. It feels like something. But it never quenches what you really need. And what you need isn't complicated. You want to be heard without being fixed. Held without being rushed. Understood without having to over-explain. You want to share your real feelings and not feel like a burden. You want someone to sit in the discomfort with you instead of reaching for the nearest distraction. But many people can't do that, not because they don't care, but because they were never taught how. They were raised to push through, to hide emotions, to stay strong. Vulnerability feels foreign to them, maybe even threatening. So they flinch when you're honest. They dodge when you go deep. They retreat behind humor, silence, or advice, not because they want to hurt you, but because they don't know what else to do. And while you can understand that, it doesn't make the loneliness go away. Because understanding why someone can't be there for you doesn't make their absence any less painful. So what do? First, you stop trying to earn presence from people who can't offer it. It's not your job to make them more emotionally available. It's not your fault that they shut down when you open up. And it's not a reflection of your worth when someone else doesn't know how to hold space for your truth. Next, you start noticing the tiny signals of emotional safety. The person who doesn't interrupt. The friend who asks a second question instead of changing the subject. The one who says, "That sounds really hard," and means it. You begin building your support system around those small but powerful moments. Because emotional availability isn't about someone having all the right words. It's about them staying present even when they don't. And here's something else: you can be emotionally available to yourself. You can learn to stay with your own feelings instead of dismissing them. You can validate your own fear, your own sadness, your own joy without needing anyone else to agree. You can write, talk, cry, reflect, move, whatever helps you hear yourself clearly. Because sometimes the worst loneliness comes from not being able to reach yourself anymore. When you're so used to being dismissed that you begin to pre-dismiss your own feelings before anyone else can. Undoing that takes time. It takes reminding yourself, my emotions are valid. My pain matters. I deserve connection that goes deeper than convenience. You deserve more than just someone who shows up. You deserve someone who stays. Not physically, but emotionally. And the more you become that for yourself, the easier it is to spot it in others. You begin to seek out relationships not just for company, but for clarity, for empathy, for resonance, for shared silence that doesn't feel empty. You learn to stop trying to force depth where there's only surface. You stop begging for comfort from people who don't know how to give it. And most importantly, you stop blaming yourself for their emotional walls. Because your need to connect isn't a flaw. It's a sign you're still open, still human, still reaching. And one day, you'll find someone reaching back, not out of obligation, but out of that same sacred desire to be felt. And when that happens, you won't feel like you're talking to a wall anymore. You'll feel seen. You'll feel held. You'll feel home. You'd think the hardest part about feeling lonely is the absence of people. But sometimes the hardest part is being around people who make you feel like you're not enough. This is the loneliness that blooms in the shadow of comparison. You scroll through your feed. Someone's laughing with a big group of friends. Someone else is on a perfect vacation. Another is celebrating a promotion. And suddenly, your quiet night alone doesn't feel peaceful anymore, it feels pathetic. Your mind starts whispering things you didn't ask to hear. They have more friends, more fun, more love, more life. And you feel small. And not just small, defective. Like everyone else got the manual for how to be lovable, social, magnetic, and you missed that class completely. It's not just the images that hurt. It's the stories your mind tells about them. Stories where everyone else belongs. Where everyone else is chosen. Where everyone else is enough. And you're watching from the outside. This is a specific kind of loneliness. One that tells you you're the only one who feels this way. One that convinces you your difference is a weakness. One that slowly makes you pull back not just from people, but from yourself. You stop sharing your excitement because it feels silly. You stop inviting people to things because you assume they'll say no. You stop reaching out because you don't want to be the needy one again. And over time, loneliness becomes your new normal. Not because no one wants you around, but because you've become convinced they don't. And that belief, I don't belong, is perhaps the most painful one we carry. But let's slow that spiral for a moment. Because here's what comparison doesn't show you: context. That person with the big group of friends. Maybe they feel unseen in that crowd. The couple with the perfect smiles. Maybe they are in therapy every week just trying to hold it together. The person celebrating success. Maybe they cry themselves to sleep, unsure if any of it really matters. Comparison makes you forget that everyone's struggling with something. But they just don't post about it. It also makes you forget your own value. you stop seeing your quiet strengths, your loyalty, your deep thoughts, your way of sensing when someone's not okay, even when they say they are. You trade your authenticity for someone else's highlight reel and wonder why you feel empty. But here's a truth you might need to hear out loud. You are not behind. You are not broken. You are not unlovable. You are different, yes, but difference is not deficiency. And the more you compare, the more you blur your own vision. You stop building your life based on what brings you peace, joy, and meaning, and start chasing shadows of someone else's version of fulfillment. But the cue to comparison isn't to push harder or fake more. It's to return to yourself, to what makes you feel alive even when no one's watching, to the kinds of conversations that light you up even if they're rare, to the relationships that are small in number but rich in soul. Because loneliness grows when we lose connection to our truth. So how do you come back? Start with gratitude, but not the Instagram kind. The deep kind. The kind that says, I'm thankful for the friend who checks in when no one else does. For the walk I took where I felt calm for the first time in days. For the weird hobby that makes no sense to others but brings me joy. Then remind yourself, you are not everyone. And you're not meant to be. The more you lean into what's real for you, the more you attract people who see it, value it, crave it. And that's where belonging begins, not with being like everyone else, but with being fully yourself. Yes, loneliness hurts. But comparison doesn't cure it. Connection does. And connection isn't built by measuring up, it's built by showing up. As you are. With your quirks, your doubts, your quiet hopes. Because the people who are meant for you, they are not looking for perfect. They are looking for real. And that's what you are. Even on the days you forget it. There's a strange kind of ache that happens when you feel like the world is moving around you, but you're standing still. Like you're watching life happen for other people. They are growing, laughing, connecting, becoming. And you're stuck in this fog of loneliness, unsure where to go or who to reach for. This is the stillness of disconnection, not just from others, but from yourself. It doesn't always come with loud sadness. Sometimes it's just numbness. You're not crying, but you're not really laughing either. You're not heartbroken, but you're not full of love. You wake up, go through the motions, talk to people, smile when needed, but it all feels hollow. You wonder, is this it? Is this what life's supposed to feel like? And deep down, you know the answer is no. But you don't know how to fix it. So you scroll, you distract, you bury. You keep busy. You keep quiet. You hope the feeling passes. And when it doesn't, the loneliness starts to turn inward. Not just, I feel lonely, but maybe I deserve to feel this way. Not just, I can't connect, but maybe I'm unconnectable. This is how disconnection distorts your self-image. It convinces you the problem isn't just around you, it's you. But pause here. Let's breathe into that thought. Because what if the distance you feel isn't a reflection of your worth, but a signal of your need? Your need for depth, for purpose, for something real. What if your disconnection isn't a personal failure, but a signpost pointing towards something you've been ignoring? Because here's the truth, loneliness often comes not from a lack of people, but from a lack of meaning. You might be surrounded by bodies but starved of soul, busy but empty, plugged in but deeply unseen. So what's the way out? You won't like this answer at first, because it doesn't involve anyone swooping in. It doesn't promise a sudden rush of new friends or a perfect romance that makes everything okay. The way out starts with you. More specifically, with your honesty. You start by admitting the truth you've been avoiding. Maybe it sounds like, I don't feel like myself anymore. I'm not happy in this friendship. I haven't laughed, like really laughed, in weeks. I miss who I was before I started pretending. These confessions might seem small, but they crack the shell you've been stuck inside. Then, slowly, you begin to reach. Not in grand ways. In quiet ones. You take yourself on a walk not because you should, but because you need air. You journal not for productivity, but because your thoughts need somewhere to land. You call a friend not to talk about your week, but to say, I miss us. And yes, it will feel awkward at first. Vulnerability always does. But connection starts with willingness. Willingness to feel again. To risk again. To be disappointed, yes, but also to be surprised. Because not everyone will pull away when you open up. Some will lean in. And sometimes the person you reconnect with first is you. You'll start remembering what matters to you, not what you were told should matter. You'll rediscover your sense of wonder, your curiosity, your ability to care deeply. You'll start asking better questions, not just, why do I feel this way, but, what lights me up? Who makes me feel alive? What space lets me breathe? And slowly, you'll feel that stillness shift. Not in a dramatic, movie-ending way, but in tiny, sacred moments. Moments where you feel present. Moments where you laugh and it catches you off guard. Moments where you look at yourself in the mirror and think, there you are. This is how Reconnect Ion begins, not with noise, but with attention. Not with fixing, but with feeling. And maybe tonight, that's all you need to remember. You're not broken. You're just becoming aware. You're not drifting away, you're waking up. And in that awakening, you'll find your way back. To your joy. To your meaning. To yourself. There's one more layer to this feeling of loneliness, and it's the kind that creeps in even when you've done everything right. You've reached out. You've been vulnerable. You've surrounded yourself with decent people. You've even had moments of laughter, connection, maybe even love. And yet, that ache still lingers. It's quieter now. Less sharp. But it's there, like a shadow that never leaves. So you start to wonder, is this just how life feels? Is loneliness permanent? The answer: not quite. But it is persistent. Because loneliness, like hunger, is not something you fix once and never feel again. It's a signal. A call for nourishment. For presence. For truth. And truth has layers. One layer might say, I'm lonely because I don't feel understood. Another might whisper, I'm lonely because I don't understand myself. And underneath all of it might be this quiet, trembling voice saying, I just want to be loved for who I am. Not the version you filter for others. Not the version you become to fit in. Just you. Messy. Thoughtful. Moody. Funny. Wounded. Hopeful. You. And that kind of self-acceptance. That's where true connection begins. But here's the paradox: to stop feeling lonely, you sometimes have to be okay being alone. Not forever, but long enough to hear your own voice again. Because here's what happens when you do. You stop chasing connection that costs you your peace. You stop performing for people who don't know how to receive you. You stop molding yourself to be likable and start asking, do I even like this version of me? And from that place of honesty, your loneliness transforms. It stops being an enemy and becomes a mirror. It shows you where you're hiding, where you're pretending, where you're starving for something deeper than approval. And once you see that clearly, you begin to choose differently. You choose conversations that feel nourishing, not just entertaining. You choose slowness over distraction. You choose solitude that heals over company that drains. And most importantly, you start choosing you in small ways every day. Because the most profound connection you'll ever experience doesn't start with someone else. It starts with the quiet moment when you decide, I deserve to be whole. Even if no one claps for it. Even if no one notices it. Even if the only witness to your healing is you. And in time, people will come. Not just any people, but the ones who recognize that version of you. The one who's not pretending anymore. The one who sits comfortably in their own skin. The one who knows their worth isn't up for debate. And those connections, they are slower, softer, but deeper. They feel like exhale. Like silence that doesn't itch. Like belonging that doesn't need explanation. Because you've stopped running. You've stopped grasping. You've started being. And that, right there, is the end of loneliness. Not the absence of aloneness, but the presence of wholeness. Let's land here. Together. So now, the room is quieter. Your thoughts have softened. Your breath, slower. Maybe the ache's still there, but it's less sharp, more familiar. Maybe it feels less like something to fix and more like something to listen to. Tonight, you've wandered through the caves of your mind. You faced the hollowness, the hunger, the haunting question, why do I feel so lonely even when I'm not alone? And in doing so, you've done something brave. You've made space. For the truth. For the ache. For the fragile, beautiful parts of you that just want to belong. Not to everyone. Just to someone. Maybe that someone is you. Maybe tonight you are enough company. Not because you're perfect, but because you are present. And tomorrow, you'll still be here. Still real. Still reaching. And that quiet reaching, it matters more than you know. So for now, let yourself rest. Let the darkness be soft, not empty. Let the fan hum. Let the world fade. You are not invisible. You are not forgotten. You are not broken. You are becoming. And even in your stillness, you are moving towards something truer. So breathe. And when you're ready, sleep.